Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be going over how I use indigo blue and black cherry. Primarily I use these for my shadows. And you can also use them for mid-tone shadows too. You can very lightly kind of add them. But this is generally how the colors are used in my work and how I use them. They're also good not just for shadows, but also for things that would also look very fake if you use straight black on them. Something like eyelashes, fur that would otherwise look black. You can actually use these colors in the same sort of way. And I'll show you some of that, when I have pieces of work that I work these colors in with. But for right now, I just kind of want to show you how I use them initially and what I use them for when I begin a drawing. I usually start with indigo blue just to get my basic shadows and outlines out. And then I go in with black cherry to kind of refine some of that and make some of the spots a little darker than what they were with just the indigo. So I'm using a seashell drawing here just as an example to do that. So I go about outlining everything first. Sometimes I don't do it on everything that I do, but for the sake of this tutorial I will. And I do apologize if I'm a little bit late on some things here on this channel. I have been kind of having to prep for the hurricane that's supposed to come hit Florida. I don't know what category it'll be once it gets here, but hopefully we won't have much damage. I'm on the west coast of Florida, so I'm hoping that it doesn't really veer this way too much. So, I mean, if the power's out for next week, I do apologize, but if that becomes an issue, you'll know if I haven't updated anything, but if I can, I'll just like leave a text message or something like that on the channel, or just something quick that I can update. But yeah, you basically just use this for your basic shadows, and you lay them down first. And seashells are kind of good to practice some shadow and texture all at one time. I'm not particularly sure what kind of shell this is, but I found it on a beach, and I just kind of have it laying around, so I figured I'd use it as a sort of a still life reference for now. Indigo blue is also good for outlining in general if you want to, same thing with black cherry. It's good for outlining something that would otherwise be lost in your background, or you just have that sort of floating effect where you don't have any sort of, I guess you don't have any sort of elements in the image that anchor your subject to the paper anyway. At least it looks like in some different reality or something. And then there's a shadow underneath here, and with shadows they're kind of interesting. There's a very dark shadow that is the initial shape of what you have, and then there's a very light one right around its perimeter. That's what I'm looking at with this shell anyway. But you can just do it, not too much pressure. And there's a few areas right underneath the whorls here that the light is actually coming through, you can see. And then you go around, fill up some of the white gaps in there. And then you'll start on some of that lighter perimeter shading of the shadow. Very light pressure. And now you can start with black cherry to kind of go in and darken some of the shadows and textures that stick out the most, because this will actually deepen or darken some of your shadows without being solid, completely solid blue like what your indigo blue would be, and you don't have to overdo the blue part of it anyway. But you kind of go in there and in your darkest shadows right up against the rim of the object here, and it'll be right in here that you'll do that, where it's closest to whatever plane it's sitting on. You're going to have more of a darkness, and then as it veers away from the actual object it goes lighter and lighter. And there's a point here where the shell actually kind of lifts off of that plane, so that you don't the shadow doesn't touch there. And this area here especially is going to have a lot more darkness to it, the opening in the shell. I believe it's called the aperture, almost like you'd call something with a camera, where the lens is and where that opens. I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's what it's called. and just go over some of these lines in here that are part of the texture. You don't have to do it all the way around, just a little bit, maybe around the top. And then outline the bottom of the shell, and I would just leave the top outlined in indigo blue, and you can kind of leave it like that. And then lightly shade the bottom of the shell. And then just to make sure, some of this darker shadow actually has a little bit of the shape of the whorls, like the rounded areas. You're going to capture just a little bit of that in this darker area of the shadow. And you can go back in with your indigo blue to kind of sharpen things up a little more. With some of the shadows, I went kind of light just to be sure, and then you can go in and darken them a little bit more, just to make sure everything pops like it's supposed to. And you do much the same thing like you did with the black cherry. Make sure you have those curved edges on that shadow and the indigo blue. And then with this area I would do a little bit more black cherry, and then I would call it done. And maybe do some lines, just suggesting more of a curve in those shells, or in the whorls of the shell. And then there you have it. That's how I generally use indigo blue and black cherry for my shadows, and how I start my drawings. I usually get in the deepest shadows in there, sometimes the outlines, and that is how you can use them too. There are also other uses that you can use these colors for, but generally they're not as prominent as what you're going to be using in terms of shadow. These two colors are primarily meant, at least in how I use them, for shadow. So I hope that was helpful to people watching, and definitely let me know what you think, and thank you for watching.